too, but actually.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another year of Forever Green Initiative updates and discussion. And as most of you know, we usually pause for a few minutes to let more folks come online. So we will do that again as we have in the past. So we'll pause here for maybe 3 to 4 minutes and entertain any updates or comments that anyone has. We haven't been together for a few months, so if there's anything that any of you want to bring up in front of the group today, please do it now if you'd like.
I'll be taking 2 bands down to Salina, Kansas for the Prairie Festival, funded by Forever Green. So it's a carpool opportunity for anybody that wants to jump in and attend the Prairie Festival.
So what was just stated is that there's a carpool opportunity to go down to the Land Institute, to the Prairie Festival. What date is it?
The 23rd through the 25th.
23rd through the 25th, and you'll be going down on
Friday
the 22nd,
23rd.
23rd. All right.
Hey, Lois, could you just let us know if you can hear us?
I'm able to hear you and Dawn very well. I was not able to hear the question that was asked until Dawn repeated it.
So we are getting an owl. So we will have an owl for the use in the future. So that will take care of the issue that you just described. So we'll have that, I hope, by next week, and have it set up so we'll be able to hear speakers in the room more effectively. Okay.
I could also zoom in and unmute myself.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Any other comments from anyone online? So for those of you that are online, we have 3, 6, 9, 10 folks in 408. And as the semester goes along, we would certainly encourage you to come to 408 for social conversation. But if that doesn't work out for you, obviously we enjoy having you on Zoom for all of the meetings as we move through the next two semesters. And just to remind you, in the invitation that you received from Elizabeth, there is the schedule for the next 2 semesters. So all of the presentations have been organized and are presented to you for review. Please don't pick and choose. Please attend all of the presentations, because the reason we have these presentations is to provide everyone with the opportunity to provide input to all of the efforts that are going on under the Forever Green umbrella. So what we found over time, some very interesting ideas come up from folks that are not actively engaged in that area of research, but bringing a new skill set to the conversation from diverse backgrounds has worked out, I think, pretty effectively over the last number of years. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have a little outline here of what's going to be presented. I hope they can see that. So this is basically welcome back, and then the next big issue is the introduction of Mitch Hunter. the new executive director for the Forever Green Initiative, and we're obviously very happy to have Mitch.
Sorry, as Don introduces me, I'm screwing everything up. I am trying to go back one slide and it's not listening to me. So we'll just have to look. Yeah, we'll have to look at this black slide for a minute until I take over here. Sorry, Don.
Well, I mean, is it ready to go?
Yeah,
All right, so I'll turn it over to Mitch. Rather than having Nick or I introduce Mitch, we've decided to have Mitch present his background and give some ideas to why he decided to join us, giving up a high quality position he was in to come back to join the Forever Green Initiative, and give him the opportunity to give you some thoughts about what he's looking forward to in the future development of the Forever Green Initiative. So with that, Mitch, it's yours.
thank you, Don. Hi, everyone. Before I get going, I just want to make sure we are recording, and I didn't start the recording. Maybe Elizabeth did, and it says pause or stop.
Yep,
So
it's
assume we're
automatically recording, so it is.
automatically.
Yep.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, my name is Mitch Hunter. I'm now the associate director of Forever Green, and I'm from Minnesota originally, but I do come from a family of farmers. When I was born, my parents were farming in Illinois, and then we moved back up here where my mom is from. So I was exposed to agriculture as a kid, but I really got excited and passionate about the interplay between agriculture and the environment in college. I did my first 2 years at a place called Deep Springs College, which is a 2-year school on a working cattle ranch in Eastern California up in the high desert. And it's a very fragile environment. Takes some really nuanced management to be sustainable. But I saw how, diverse groups of people working together, the ranch, Native Plant Society, the Forest Service, the BLM, other stakeholders all working together, were able to come up with a management plan that was both beneficial for the ranch and for the ecology of the area. So that kind of inspired me to work on that interplay throughout my career. It led me to work, and I'm gonna probably not be able to go, oh, that time it didn't let me go back, great. That led me to work on policy. So I studied after Deep Springs, I went to Harvard and studied political science for a couple of years, got an internship in DC, and then got a job with a group called American Farmland Trust in DC, working on what became the 2014 Farm Bill, conservation policy. And as I was doing that, I realized that I was more excited about the science of how conservation can take place on farms than I was the real nitty-gritty DC policymaking. And that led me to Penn State to do my PhD in agronomy, where I focused on diverse cover crop mixtures in an organic system, and I layered on questions about drought and climate resilience. From there, I came home and had an opportunity to do a postdoc with Jake and Craig, working on Kernza. So a lot of great exposure to Forever Green issues, Kernza especially, but Forever Green as a whole as well, and some of our farmer partners and other partners like you're seeing on the screen there. And after a little while, had the opportunity to go back to American Farmland Trust as a research director. And I was doing work mostly focused on agricultural land use change. That's what this map is illustrating, hotspots of where agricultural lands are being converted to more developed uses, both urban and low density residential. And so I led that research effort for 2.5, 3 years. And now I'm back, excited to be here. So I will take over the screen a little bit more later to talk about some things that are going on. Don's going to give a legislative update. Obviously, open to any questions or whatever. I've presented these slides a couple of times before, so they might not be new to most of you, but generally speaking, I'm just really excited to be here. I feel like Forever Green, especially having spent time in the nonprofit world and the policy world, I feel really confident that Forever Green is one of the most impactful things going. And it's also where I feel really at home and a fit where I can make a difference. So excited to be back. Looking forward to diving in deeper and getting to know everybody better and helping this whole thing move forward. Yeah, I'll leave it at that and hand it over to Don.
Well, thank you, Mitch. So we're obviously all very happy to have you back and in this leadership position. Great to have some new faces, younger folks moving into leadership role in the Forever Green Initiative. So we're glad you returned to participate in this hard work of moving a program like this forward. I wanted to also take the opportunity to give you an update. You know, we mention every once in a while about the legislative agenda. And I just wanted to remind all of you, this legislative agenda and the progress that's been made has a very long history. You know, it goes back to the days of the development of MISA years ago, that we developed all these relationships with NGOs in the state of Minnesota that were very interested in the future development of agriculture around rural economic development, ecosystem services, water quality, and all of those issues. And we're lucky over the years that we've had a grand set of really well-organized NGOs that have taken up the issues that we have within the Forever Green Initiative and have actually moved them through the process, the legislative process, to gain support for your work and your ideas, right? So we have to give thanks to that group of folks that have been doing this work on our behalf for a long, long period of time. And I would argue that that's what makes us different. And when you look around other states don't have that network of NGOs that have picked up on a set of ideas and moved it forward to explain to the legislative process the value of this type of work. So what I'm reporting back to you is basically the outcome of that work from the NGOs on behalf of this program through the state legislative process, not the federal, but the legislative process, right? So in this last legislative session, you guys know that most bills never got through, but the bill that supported us did. And one of the reasons that it did was there was strong bipartisan support for your work, both on both sides of the aisle, right? So you should feel proud that your work is being perceived by a wide range of folks as valuable to agriculture, rural communities, and then the protection of the natural resource base. So in the Omnibus Policy and Finance Bill, $630,000 per year has been added to the Department of Agriculture base. So this is continuing funding for Forever Green held within the Department of Agriculture base as a pass-through set of resources to CFANS, to the University of Minnesota, right, through CFANS, and then for the work of the Forever Green Initiative. This is a huge breakthrough, right, in terms of more continuity in the programming for the initiative. Within this allotment, it focuses on R&D for the Forever Green Initiative, the development of markets and supply chains for the Forever Green crops, right? So that will be broken out in some way, yet to be determined by the dean of CFANS and others. These dollars will be officially available July 1 of 2023, right? So less than a year from now. So I would imagine there'll be a call for proposals, and we'll go through that whole process for that resource space, right? We also, in this last legislative session, received $763,000 for Forever Green R&D, and Mitch will be talking to you about here in a few minutes, but those dollars are available now. So there'll be a call for proposals that would be coming out in the next, he'll tell you, in a week or so, however fast you can move it through the system. And that funding goes through 2024 or 5/25, right? There was another set of funds that went through LCCMR that was basically for supply chain support to develop supply chains for the Forever Green crops, right? But both of those went through LCCMR, right? And then I should just give you an update, you know, there's a lot of negotiations that goes on within the state agencies about their priorities for clean water legacy funds. So in the recommendation that's coming out of the council, the recommendation at this stage is for 7.0 million for support of the Forever Green initiative across R&D, maintaining the partnership, and supply chain development, right? So those will be the key areas where the 7 million will go. And I would imagine there'll be another, if it goes through, this hasn't been approved yet, understand. But this is in the framework as a recommendation from the council to the legislature, right?
Would that be? Would that be kind of on, like, I'm just curious how that's structured in the other framework of LCCMR funding.
This is not LCCMR funding.
Oh,
The one up here is.
yeah, so is the, oh, yeah, I was looking at the line item on the LCCMR funding. I was curious, yeah, I was curious how this, like, allotment to Forever Green interacts with the existing LCCMR funding. Like, is it taken as a piece of it, or is it layered on top of the existing?
It became a piece of it. In other words, the legislature decided to not fund some things and to fund some other things.
Well, but that's not exactly right. It's
All right.
additional to the other.
The baseline
LCCMR, right,
LCCMR.
right. Yeah, it's not like, I mean, those are literally independent of this.
Okay,
Well, the LCCMR funds that we are receiving did come directly out of LCCMR,
Total pool.
the total pool. That's what I'm saying, right?
And that's a one-shot deal.
That's a one-shot deal, right?
I'll be talking more about how we're gonna get them out.
But
The
they
bottom-
decided not to fund some projects and to introduce this funding. All right. So it was a trade-off, right? So it wasn't additional money, it was within that package as I understand it.
Well, that's not, I mean, that's not part of it. It was an additional, there's the normal LCCMR review process, right?
Yep.
And then this as an additional ad hoc thing that the legislature did, somewhat controversially. Okay, so normal process, submission, arduous review, this ad hoc process, in all candor.
But there were some things that went through the process that did not get funded, and these did, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Not Forever Green things necessarily.
There were other things than
Yeah.
just Forever Green,
Yeah.
right? Right.
And then this 7 million is quite a bit higher than the previous
It's a,
recommendation.
it's kind of a doubling, a little less than a double of what we had last year that supported the last call for proposals that many of you participated in, right? Right. So these two are in place and these are projections, and if approved in the legislative process, they would be available again July 1 of 2023. Right. So that's my legislative update, but the summary that I would give you is that you have strong support on both sides of the aisle for the work that you're doing across the R&D and the development of the partnership and the supply chain work. Questions?
If I can ask a question.
David, go ahead.
So traditionally, what we have done with this money is divided it up into competitive grants.
Yep.
But now that we have a pot of money that looks like it's going to be coming in more routinely, I'm wondering if we might be able to set some of this money aside to make us more like a center in terms of perhaps dedicating some of the money to undergraduate support, to perhaps travel and perhaps paid charges for publications that are outside of things that we're competing for in terms of project proposals.
Yeah, so this is David Marks. David Mark is asking whether or not there may be considerations for a new funding model using the funds that are coming through the Department of Ag in terms of the base, whether there would be other, rather than having just a call for proposals, whether or not there could be dedicated funds to other needs and opportunities within the Forever Green initiative. And what I would say back to you, David, that's the conversation that's going to be occurring as we develop the new model for the Forever Green initiative. We will be bringing folks with inside the institution and others together to think this through, to make a recommendation to the dean and to the Department of Agriculture for how these dollars should be positioned basically for the future.
Thanks.
So no decisions have been made on that yet, but we have to make that decision within the next 9 months. Okay. Any other comments? If not, I will turn it back to Mitch. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, Don. So on that RFP front, and feel free to jump in at any time or raise your hand. So this is that LCCMR funding. We've got $763,000 to work with. So we anticipate 5 to 8 awards, roughly speaking, with a maximum of 150,000. And we're really trying to use this money to fill gaps. So from the last RFP process, there were a number of teams that were not funded or underfunded, and especially for those teams, especially where there's a critical need that could really disrupt a research program or a breeding program. If that need is not filled, that's how we want to deploy these funds. We think that'll be most strategic. So just stating that again in a different way, the priority is to address critical unmet needs, and this is basically language out of the draft RFP. RFP is not final yet. So maintaining funding for personnel, keeping breeding and other research efforts going that would otherwise, face some kind of limitation because they're short on funds, or allowing some lines of research to get to the point where either they're complete and they're, just a year or two away maybe from completion, or they're at a point where they can go after larger grants. So those are some of the priorities. We're also working on tightening the RFP language to make it really clear that we want these proposals to be focused on forever green crops and cropping systems. The status is that the RFP, the draft RFP language is with the Associate Dean for Research and her office, and we've been working closely with her, just waiting on feedback on, the changes that we propose and that sort of thing. So should be moving forward soon. We're also have proposed a review committee list to them that they're going to give feedback on. It will be pretty much made up of department heads that has in the past. The approximate timeline, and I put approximate because, as you can see, the release date we've been shooting for is Monday, but we're still waiting for that feedback from the Associate Dean. So unless it comes in today and they give 2 thumbs up with no edits, we'll probably need to push that back a little bit. Now, so on the front end, it might move back a little bit. That being said, we've kind of padded this on the back end. So that project start date of March 1st, I still think there's a potential that we can move that earlier, as long as we can get the RFP out soon. You will see we're not putting in a whole lot of time between release date and due date, and that's because we think of this as a second chance for the RFPs from the last round, with the thought that hopefully it's not starting from a blank page, it's editing what was put in for the last round. So, if we get an overwhelming wave of feedback that that's unrealistic, great. Just let us know. Let us know what you think. This is not set in stone. But we also at the same time want to move quickly so that people who are waiting on this funding to get good work done, can get the funding. And we basically have to get the whole process done, everything decided, all of the projects identified and allocated before we can even go back to LCCMR and get the money released to us. So everybody's got to be kind of in lockstep to get this out. And then the end date of end of June 2025 is set in the legislation. So we cannot have any extensions beyond that. Yeah, any questions on this RFP? Obviously, it'll go around to the Forever Green list, other channels that people use to see RFPs, but it'll come out just as soon as we can get it out. And yeah, do give me any feedback if you want to after the meeting. So if not, I'm going to jump ahead or move on to the overview of this executive committee. And I know that some people have been hearing about this. Not everybody's been hearing about this. So I'm going to, kind of go back to the beginning and talk through it. And to set it up, I wanted to talk through the overall structure of the Forever Green Initiative. And these could be one of these giant, really complex org charts. I just tried to focus on the real central part of it here at the university that is understandable and pretty concrete. So the first box I'll put up is the R&D team. So that's mostly the people on these meetings, right? And we have a wide group of different sorts of people who are involved. You could also include graduate student summer and graduate student lab assistants. I didn't put a bullet for them, but there's a wide group of people who
Undergrads too.
that's what I meant to say. Grad students are up there. I meant to say I didn't include undergrads. But Don has proposed that we refer to all of these folks as Forever Green Associates, which I think is kind of a nice, easy way to do it. We've got associate faculty, we've got associate students, etc. So you might hear that language, at least from me, as I give this talk. And notably, it's a lot of people. It's 50 to 100 people, and maybe even more, I would guess, if we tallied up all of the summer folks. So a big, robust group of people, and that's very cool. The other leg of the stool, or what have you, is the commercialization team. Colin's going to be giving us a lot more detail in a minute. That is about 5 people, and really 2 of them are in the process of figuring out getting them hired and brought on board. So definitely not equal in terms of staff numbers, and that's something that we're thinking about because we need more capacity on the commercialization side. But as far as centrality to our mission, I think we do see them as equal, and we need to have both of those functions well covered and well integrated between the 2. So this executive committee will interface with both of these and actually be a way to help bring together and have coordination between the research and development side and the commercialization side. So what is the executive committee? It's going to be about 5 faculty members. We'll also figure out ways to include other Forever Green associates in this leadership process, but we are delegating that to this new executive committee rather than making all of those decisions just as the leadership team or management team or whatever you want to call it. So it'll be those faculty members and the 4 of us on the management team sitting together, having conversations that influence the work of R&D and commercialization. And then last, just to note that, of course, all of this sits within CFANs. So the dean is very important, the dean's office broadly, and the leadership team is housed in the Department of Agronomy. So Gary's leadership is also important. One thing that I'll note now is that the name is a little different than what it was when I first shared this concept with faculty. So originally I called it the R&D Executive Committee, but we quickly realized that we don't need 2. And so you could have one for R&D, one for commercialization, and then we just have more bodies and more meetings and et cetera. And it kind of reinforces siloing rather than bringing it together. So right now it's the executive committee for Forever Green. We have Colin as the lone dedicated commercialization person on it. And so over time, we will need to figure out if that model's working, if we have other folks that should be part of that, and who those people might be. Okay, so more on the overview, the purpose. The main purpose is a new leadership structure for Forever Green, getting to long-term stability, having it be more democratic, open, inclusive, and, you know, frankly, we have a leadership transition impending. Don and Nick are very candid about the fact that they're not going to be around here
I thought
forever.
you said they were very old.
Don and Nick are very old. They will live on forever in Forever Green. So, you know,
Immortality serum.
yes.
After product.
Right. Yeah, we'll find something in a prairie plant that, you know, we'll let them live forever. But so that's really the main overarching purpose. The more detailed purposes are ongoing strategic leadership and coordination among the crop teams, and then coordination among the crop teams, commercialization, the partnership, and all of the broader elements that make up Forever Green Initiative, Forever Green Partnership. The membership, like I said on the previous slide, the 5 faculty members, they'll be elected for 3-year terms, only able to serve 2 terms in a row. I should say these are the sorts of things that if the executive committee decides that's not the right structure, we can change it. We're making it up as we go along, and we are not going to be bound to the words on this slide, as well as the leadership / management team. Roles, broadly speaking, I'm guessing you all can imagine what the roles might be. The broadest one is to be leaders and ambassadors for Forever Green. You know, we need to keep this merry band of folks together and maintain the umbrella or platform as a whole, even as we are effective and make a lot of progress on individual crops. So that's kind of a broad role, but we want these folks to take up the mantle that Nick and Don have been carrying or wearing for many years. More straightforwardly, meeting monthly, going through major issues, and in between meetings, you know, all the things that you do in between meetings when you're serving at one of these committees. The initial area of focus is, first of all, just like to constitute itself, figure out how the executive committee itself is going to run, processes, norms, etc. But then the immediate biggest priority is this leadership transition and leadership structure. So we will be taking some time to sit back and look at the big picture, but it seems to the management team that this is really where we need to have this executive committee focus immediately, rather than getting into the weeds on every little decision that is being made and all the moving parts of Forever Green, which would never be able to be accomplished in a 90-minute meeting once a month with, you know, 9 or 10 people in the room. But beyond that, in addition to that, as really important things come up, or once we've nailed down that leadership structure question, we'll need input on things like the Forever Green funds. The question that David just asked is a perfect example. Do we want to change that model? Do we want to, how do we improve the way the teams work together or work with commercialization and the partnership? You know, some really basic stuff like what are our shared needs for infrastructure, for new expertise, for personnel, etc. So just giving you an outline sketch, and this will be evolutionary and adaptive as things come up and then we move forward. Now, the burying of the lead for those of you who are not on the list of Forever Green active research faculty is that we are already actually in the middle of the vote for this executive committee. So the selection procedure is that the active, and this is just for the faculty associate members, those folks were given the opportunity to self-nominate. They are now being given the opportunity to vote. So if you have not voted yet, please vote. The voting is closing today at 5 p.m. and we have good participation so far, but a few folks haven't voted. Yes, vote today. And the last point I wanted to make is just that we see this as a transparent body. This is not a few anointed people who get cloistered away and make decisions and then pronounce them from on high. We have to have some efficiencies. We can't have a conversation among 50 people all the time for every issue, but we don't want to be closing people out of the conversation. So if anyone who does not end up being part of this ever has thoughts, questions, criticisms, ideas, whatever, bring them to any one of us on the management team, on the executive committee. If you want to come, make a pitch to the executive committee at a meeting, we can do that too. So it's going to be wide open for people to know what's going on. Yeah, that is what I have in terms of executive committee, and I'm ready to hand it over to Colin unless there are questions.
Well, I'll just say one thing. I think this is, an idea that we've been floating for, a number of years, and I'm really excited that we now are making that step to this new model for leading the Forever Green into the future. And again, great to have Mitch and Colin here to help guide the next steps in the development of the Forever Green works.
For the transparency, are you thinking to, like, ahead of each of these executive committee meetings to kind of like, give a shout out for agenda items, or is that kind of what you're thinking? Or
I'm open to that. I haven't gotten down to that kind of nitty-gritty level, but I think it depends on what kind of phase of work we're in, right? If we're in a really deep, intensive leadership structure focus and don't have bandwidth for more, then maybe that's different. But I like that idea. Keep reminding people, yeah, these conversations are ongoing, and we're all ears for input.
yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of build transparency into, right, the need for like an efficient fund.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Is there a question?
I didn't exactly hear what was just said, but one thing I wanted to say too, and that is that for the last umpteen years, the Forever Green Initiative has pretty much been run by Don and now Nick, who have pretty much been free to the Forever Green Initiative because they've been pretty much donating their time from their tenured positions. And so I'm just wondering, again, where your money is coming from and how we're going to fund this. And again, it looks like that would be a perfect example of this recurring fund would be something that could keep folks like yourself who are not tenured faculty engaged in Forever Green ongoing, and that would be one model for sustaining this system, into the future.
Did everybody hear that in the room? Okay. Yes, I think that's a good point, David. We have been getting a lot of free labor, and yeah, that's absolutely going to be on the table as the executive committee thinks through what is the new structure, because we have to be able to fund it.
Well, just for me, that's David, you're right on the mark, right? Those are the two big issues. How do you stabilize funding for your leadership positions, and how do you stabilize, for me, the underlying crop development positions? So those are the two things that really are in front of us as we try to stabilize, the Forever Green Initiative. So a lot of if we don't have the crops being developed, we have nothing to market, right? So it's that we need both, right? You need that leadership to gain the resources to keep that work going, and you also have to have the leadership in place. So yeah, welcome to the executive committee.
Well, for sure, Don, I would say that you've held us together for all these years with your efforts, and all these developments on the crop side wouldn't be happening without your leadership.
Yes, big shoes for even a whole committee to fill. Any other comments on this front?
Well, I would say, these sound like daunting things, but we're just proud that we made it this far, right? And there's a platform of energy behind your work, right? That's what I'm saying. So I think we'll figure it out, right, as we have in the past, right?
All right, in the interest of time, I'm gonna hand this to Colin.
Okay.
I think the cursor is over here, so you should be able to click.
There may be a
click
few people that don't know, haven't been
Okay.
part of the community, so you may just say a little bit about,
Introduction.
yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, humans in the room, humans online. It's kind of weird. There's like 20 people right here, but like people right here. So yeah, my name's Colin Cureton, and I work as the Director of Adoption and Scaling for the U of M Forever Green initiative. I started about 3.5 years ago, a supply chain development specialist role, and the work has really expanded and changed since then, and the team has grown and changed, and we're in a really interesting time of development. Let's put it that way. So our work is supported through, at least at first, some support from the Walton Family Foundation, but then has come to be integrated into major federal projects, state-funded projects, but it is all project-based, either through philanthropy or the state or federal government. So what I'm going to do today is share a little bit of an overview of what our team does generally. Like, I work with almost everyone in the room on specific things. I owe people in the room certain things that I'm aware of. My tail is between my legs on that. But that it's indicative of there's a lot happening right now. There's really a tremendous amount. So I'm just transparent about that. And then I want to do that in a more generalized sense, because there's all of these individual things, but especially with the transition of a recent team member, I've been thinking about how do we build organizational capacity, talk about what we do, generally what are our key functions, our core competencies. And I'm going to tell that through the lens of the winter oilseeds, because I've spent a lot of time over the last few years on Kernza. I still work a lot on Kernza or intermediate wheatgrass, but I spend now at least probably half my time on the winter oilseeds, and that's a bit of a transition. So I'm going to tell this story of our core competencies through recent activity on the winter oilseeds. Okay, so one day I sat down and just wrote a simple mission. It's nothing revelatory for our team, but I believe that our core function, what we get up and do every day, is to support the commercialization, adoption, and responsible scaling of continuous living cover crops and cropping systems across Minnesota and the upper Midwest food and agricultural sector. Pretty straightforward, but the basic idea here is that if you have a new technology, new crop variety, a new agronomic system, new knowledge, there is a big gap between the scientific invention and a commercial product or opportunity, right? We've also expanded from thinking of ourselves as just the commercialization team to the grower, the technology transfer and adoption process, right? Because with that innovation, it has to go across this chasm, and it needs to operate on producers' farms and in markets and in factories and other places. And then ideally, for all of this to make an impact, it needs to be scaled up. So we think of those three things as kind of together. Things need to be commercialized, they need to be adopted, they need to be scaled for continuous living cover to operate on the landscape. So as far as core competencies, I tried to one day corral everything we were doing into a conceptual buckets that include strategy, capacity, resources, and policy and systems. And I think within that, we do 3 to 5 things in each of those categories. And within each of those sub-bullets, there could be like a universe of projects, right? But I think the strategy conversation, and I'm going to give examples of each of these, but just to dig into capacity, for example, I think there's this concept that researchers steward your laboratories, growers steward their fields. We really steward that innovation process. That is how those growers and companies and researchers talk to one another. And we build kind of efficient, structured mechanisms for that to happen, usually through specific projects, but we also form that kind of capacity, that bridge, maybe that image you've seen. We bridge a lot of gaps. So when companies are forming or standing up a new product, there's a lot of gaps in this work, and Connie and I would run across those gaps, and now Andrew and others. We help people make the case around the economics of, for example, the economics or the environmental benefits of these crops within their companies or within their agencies. And then ideally, we're also helping spark entrepreneurship. We're bringing capacity to that ground game level of helping stand up a group like a perennial pantry, for example. And so I'm going to go through and give some examples of this, but I think this is a generalized sense of the 4 main areas of work we do, and then some kind of categories. And then imagine that this is happening across about 6 to 8 crops, right, with a relatively small team. So there's a lot going on. We're trying to systematize that. Okay, so an oilseeds example for as far as this wayfinding, setting the compass, navigating sense, it's the idea that there's a whole literature around innovation trajectories. Right? You have a new invention like cryptocurrency is a great example. What's that for? Where's that going to go? Right? It's like pennycress, camelina. Right? There's a whole bunch of different applications, and I think we are in a front end conversation before any of those companies gets to say the technology commercialization department at the University of Minnesota. We are in a pretty deep conversation with a huge range of partners about where that technology could go. And we help corral those partners and give a sense of where likely end uses are. And so this is an example on the winter oil seeds that right now, I mean, Don could tell you, we could all tell you that the last 3 months have been absolutely tremendous as far as we've talked to almost the entire food and agricultural sector and the major players in them. The world's largest seed technology companies, farm equipment manufacturers, energy companies, broadline processors, these kind of big players that we expected would engage in the winter oil seeds are now and continue to through some of our CPG partners in the Embold coalition, for example. And so if we were to think about setting the compass on the winter oil seeds, I think near term, right now, people call me and they say, I want to buy truckloads of this to crush it to make renewable diesel or a sustainable aviation fuel. We have ongoing, important, likely, highly impactful work going on around food and biopolymers with multiple companies, but I think the R&D in that is in progress. And right now, like mass quantities could be sold to be made into renewable fuels. So something we do is digest all of this and actually communicate that back to the research team in terms of what they should be targeting.
Hurry up.
Hurry up, but also maybe the food trait isn't the near-term one that we need. What we need is boosted yield and other, traits that could be beneficial for those fuels applications, or to make the meal usable, because 2/3 of that seed is meal and not oil. So that's one example. So an example of how we bring capacity to make the case around these crops. Just play this in the background. We generate all kinds of assets, whether they're media, written reports, 1 to 2 pagers. I transferred over all my presentations the other day. I have 120 forever green pitch decks that I made over the last 3 years. And like each one is a little different. So that's an example. We are constantly making the case around these crops in different formats in the media, through written and applied resources, and oftentimes in Google Slides. Here's an example of resources, how we broker good information. This is from one meeting we had a couple weeks ago, where we now host annual meetings. Hopefully these things play, that integrate the agronomy, that integrate the state of market activity, that have farmers experimenting with these crops in their fields, with the de-risking programs. We integrate all of this and present it in a package because we have limited bandwidth, right? So this all has to be, this goes to that adoption piece. So what's the commercial potential? How do growers adopt this? How do we de-risk that? What are the opportunities? So this is from one, hour, 90-minute meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, 2 days after we had one for another crop. This was for camelina specifically. So this is a key function and just one example of how we do that. And then policies and systems, we think about these pilot supply chain projects is really important. These are just a few images. Each one is a universe of its own, but we hosted, or we partnered with the Embold Coalition on a winter camelina pilot program that took camelina on farm to about a dozen farms in Minnesota, upper Midwest. Got industry partners into those fields, supported them to succeed with winter camelina production, and recruited an aggregation and seed cleaning partner, one of which just won one of the Climate Smart. Our camelina seed is sitting with the seed company that won the major Climate Smart agricultural partnership grant to scale cover crops, including camelina. And so our volume is sitting there with them, and we've achieved, and it's 97% germ, right? So there's a lot of work that went into that. And then also that was a platform to engage all of these companies. So that's a way that we can help move systems forward, is really as a proof of concept with these pilot programs. You see in the lower left is just an image of these eco regions we've established around the state in partnership with the state of Minnesota. Those are economic and environmental clusters of opportunity where we're de-risking early adoption of now Kernza, camelina, winter barley, and hybrid rye. Program started with Kernza, is now expanding to 1 winter oilseed and 2 winter grains. And on the right, we have the kind of pathway of a few images that I thought they would be sequenced out, animated and whatnot. But basically on our first try this year, we developed a continuous living covered value chain fund in partnership with entrepreneurs and businesses that want to take these crops to market. Usually the small and medium businesses that are starting, from scratch, essentially. We had to build around that, and it ultimately was funded through that LCCMAR process that Don mentioned, receiving, Senate Republican chair support, and also in the House Democratic-led climate action package, receiving great bipartisan support. So these are a couple examples that show how, I think of policy and systems as like the soil health of these crops. Like, what environment are we planting them into, right? And if that environment's not prepared for a great new continuous living cover system, it's not gonna work, right? So that's part of our commercialization program, is you need to address the environment in which or what you could call the regime of where the niche solution is entering into. So this just shares a little bit more about that pilot project with Embold. This is a single field in Kellogg, Minnesota. This was established last fall. In March, greened up in April, a soybean planted in May, emerged in mid-May. There's the relay system functioning on farm. There it is right before maturity, right prior to harvest, and there's the soybean coming through. That moved over to a seed company partner just over the border in South Dakota, and will now be sending that volume to some of the world's largest companies are getting their seed from us from this pilot project. Because we have the seed, and also we have the knowledge base that they can work with us on for that system. And so that'll be trialed on 2, hopefully 500-acre pilots, as well as breeding trials.
And just, I need to say, I mean, in terms of the work that Colin did to make that happen, I mean, that's an unbelievable contribution to the work, right? I would imagine you guys all understand that, but key work and high quality work that Colin has done over the last couple of years to make this happen.
Thanks, Don. Moving on, make me embarrassed. Okay, so here's who we are. You kind of saw that structure Mitch presented, but I'm just kind of putting some faces to names. It's not a traditional org chart by any means, just getting some faces up there and sharing some functions, because we have Andrew Leach here in the room, who's a new sustainable commercialization associate. I also have honorary Forever Green commercialization warrior, Connie Carlson, who's now very happy for her to received a promotion within our SDP, but will forever and always be a partner of Forever Green. And also Sienna Nesser, who's up in Grand Marais. It's a research specialist that is doing some really important work on grower engagement and execution of the eco implementation program. We also are intending to hire a field agronomist, as well as a replacement of sorts for Connie, but that address some just key gaps in the team that will hopefully have some expertise in food science and or biosystems engineering that can really interface with industry on some of those R&D and product development needs. We're trying to articulate this in the academic literature, just, in all our spare time. I think it's our peer platforms are scaling up. I don't know if you noticed, the Land Institute, Savannah Institute are growing like mad. I think we're growing as well, but something I'm noticing is there's a whole community of practice that is convened in some fashion through the Learning Experimentation Network, Forever Green Partnership. But in general, these people that are trying to take new technologies and systems to scale need best practices, the way you need best practices to grow crop or whatever, right? So what are we actually doing here? And so the spoiler alert is, this is in review. I should mention Jake's the editor, so. Oh, excuse, okay. Not for this paper, but the journal. Just a spoiler alert here is that I think there's at least 3 key things going on in this story we wrote about how we've engaged with Kernza in the last 3 years. And I think we've essentially built a technology transfer and adoption program. We've kind of managed the innovation process to the extent one is able to. Everybody loves innovation, but it's actually really messy and complicated. And we are trying to create a receptive agri-food sector, both the policy, culture, social awareness, consumer acceptance. And to,
Colin, I would say if that gets published, make sure you get that off to the powers that be that advertise such in the college.
will do.
Just to, yeah.
Thanks, David. Just to the final 2 slides is to redirect you back to Kernza. There's a whole universe of Kernza stuff going on. As I mentioned, everything there about the winter oil seeds. These products have hit the market in the last year or so in the Kernza universe. Lots of work going on behind that. And thanks. There's my contact information.
Tell them what's going to happen on Monday.
On Monday, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is bringing the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service and 35 attachés from 25 countries that are based at their embassy in Washington, D.C. are coming to visit U of M Forever Green and see our fields and hear about the program and drink some Kernza beer.
Food.
And food. We're feeding them a nice meal. So essentially, it's an opportunity for, I feel like, this work to be to learn about this work in an international audience, to build the research partnerships with other countries, cultivate talent, bring in foreign students and professionals, build import-export markets and things of that nature long term, because these crops have global applications and potential. Same way when canola was developed, like huge quantities were marketed in Japan, for example. There's a lot of places in the world that would buy a lot of Kernza, but we need to build that import-export system, for example. So any questions while Nick is getting teed up to share a little bit about the partnership?
Cool. All right, so I'm going to unshare. Nick is logging in. He's going to share his own screen.
All right. Well, one other thank you before Nick comes on while he's getting set up. I just want to thank all of you that participated in the booth at the state fair. I think appreciate all of the time that you put into making that happen. We're receiving had a lot of great conversations with people. And what's really interesting to me is the level of visibility and recognition that the Forever Green Initiative has gained over the last 8 years that we've been there, right? You can just feel that there's more and more people that have an understanding of the Forever Green initiatives we go through. And also it's a great opportunity to recruit students that transfer to the University of Minnesota and some that have transferred to the plant science program. And one of them is actually in a PhD program here. So those connections, I think, have paid out well over the years. But I just want to thank all of you that participated in helping make that happen.
All right then. Zoom folks, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Well, I am going to take a few minutes to paint a picture of this thing called the Forever Green Partnership that does form an overarching structure that within which the R&D and the commercialization and scaling aspects of Forever Green sit. And at least that's the way I see it. And there are a few different ways that one might, sort of form a mental model, as it were, of how the Forever Green activities are put together. But I'll share you a picture that sort of illustrates the whole in a second. But to define the Forever Green Partnership, it consists of this public, private, and NGO partnership that is trying to advance shared interests in this concept of agriculture, so-called continuous living cover agriculture. that Forever Green is obviously all about. And why does this exist? There is broad understanding among the network of people who are involved in this, many of whom have been mentioned by Don, by Mitch, by Colin, that it makes no sense for the university to be going it alone in this effort of trying to scale up this critically important transformation in agriculture towards more continuous living cover. That makes absolutely no sense. There are shared stakes in the public and private and NGO sectors that are really large in this agriculture. And so there's a common interest that it would be nonsensical to not try to form a structure to identify and advance those common interests. At least that's the premise. And that's a premise that is pretty strongly supported by the academic literature on how so-called sustainability transitions have occurred in the past, also major transitions in all of the, if you will, basic life support systems that support our civilization, such as it is. So food, water, energy, these are the basic things that keep humanity afloat. And those systems have undergone major transitions many times in the past. And if you look at how those happen, they generally happened because there were cross-sector, cross-scale partnerships in effect. So that's why it makes sense to have something like the Forever Green Partnership. So here is a picture of the Forever Green Partnership understood broadly. So notice that the base of the partnership are crop-specific research groups, of which there are allegedly 16, but I'm only showing 3, just for the sake of this not being too cluttered. But indeed, all 16 should be in the diagram. So just paint the other 13 in your mind. There is a commercialization, adoption, and scaling group, obviously, that we have just heard about from Colin. And there's a couple of other things that have been built. There's something called the Strategic Steering Council, which I'll tell you about in a second. There's something which Colin mentioned called the Learning and Experimentation Network. I'll also tell you about that in a second. And there is an organizing group that has concerned itself with the sort of care and feeding, housekeeping, in general, trying to drive the bus of this Forever Green Partnership business. So let me tell you a little bit about the parts and our efforts to develop this public-private NGO partnership so that it actually functions as a whole, so that it actually is, in fact, more than the sum of its parts, which is the whole point of any collective effort, I guess. So the Strategic Steering Council, if we wanted to provide a tagline for it, we might say something like ambassadors and advocates for continuous living cover agriculture. And the Forever Green Initiative, its R&D components, its commercialization and scaling components as a critically important vehicle for advancing CLC agriculture. And here I should take a second and talk a little bit about terms. So I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about the Forever Green Partnership as a whole, as that little diagram you see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, and to talk about the Forever Green Initiative as the commercialization, adopting, scaling business and all the crop-specific R&D teams. I think that's a pretty helpful nomenclature for us. So we have the partnership, which is this larger public-private NGO, et cetera. And then we have the Forever Green Initiative. The latter is more or less sits within the University of Minnesota. It's, based and rooted in the University of Minnesota. Of course, all the research groups have all kinds of branches across other universities, other institutions, such as the Land Institute. But the Forever Green Initiative is pretty much rooted and based in the University of Minnesota. The Forever Green Partnership is not. It's a much more expansive thing. So we have the steering council that, in principle, the work of the steering council is, as it says in the lower left-hand part of the slide, the work is to broaden the multi-sector base of support for CLC agriculture. So that base of support could potentially span state government, all kinds of environmental and conservation agencies, mainstream agriculture groups such as the commodity groups, certainly the private sector, and Nick Anderson, certainly folks that are interested in the fate of the rural Midwest, i.e. rural community development, economic development, certainly including historically marginalized groups. These are all sectors that arguably have stake in advancing continuous living cover agriculture, all kinds of reasons. And so the whole point of the partnership is to, an important part of the point of the partnership is to, over time, build this broad and deep base of support for continuous living cover agriculture. And the idea that the Forever Green Initiative is doing critical and unique things to advance that. So that's the logic behind why this thing should exist. And it takes a lot of care and feeding and effort and organizing to pull this thing together and to get it off the ground. It's been functioning for about 2 years at this point, and has gone through some growing pains, but is increasingly functional as a body of folks that have developed an agenda for this ambassadorship and advocacy, and that are getting out there and doing it. Another part of the partnership that we haven't already talked about today is this so-called learning and experimentation network. So this is a group of folks that are engaged in the commercialization and scaling of these crops by the very stuff that Colin was telling you about. And so roughly 5 of these folks are part of our University of Minnesota-based group that Colin was telling you about. But there actually are a bunch of others who are also doing this work. For example, affiliated with Savannah Institute, which is an agroforestry institute, Land Institute, which we all know and love, and others. And so the premise of this group is that the work that these folks are doing is very hard, very confounding, terra incognita, all the things that you probably inferred as you were listening to Colin. And we think that it's crucial to have some sort of forum in which folks are able to rise above what I often refer to as the fog of war sorry for the martial metaphor, but I think it's apt. It's some kind of fog anyway. There is a day-to-day fog that you are caught in as you try to do this work. And it's really important to have some sort of regular forum for rising above that and getting your bearings and trying to figure out how to do this work better. So that's the point of that learning and experimentation. And this group has also existed for a couple of years and is also maturing. And at this point, I think is really operating at a decently high gear. The current format is that people who are part of this group sort of take turns bringing what they consider to be interesting or vexing challenges that they're finding in their work to the table for these monthly meetings. Another thing that bears mentioning about the Forever Green Partnership is it has a bunch of what we can call ad hoc working groups that come together. And these are really meant to and do embody the interactions across sectors and scales that are critical to building this cross-sector, cross-scale network for regional diversification, advancing CLC agriculture, what we were basically trying to do in the Forever Green Partnership. The whole idea of a cross-sector, cross-scale network is the different sectors do different things, know different things, have different resources and capacities. Folks working at different scales, ditto, different knowledge, different capacities, et cetera. And the whole point of having a cross-scale, cross-sector network is that those different resources are put together, are put to good use in some logical, rational, strategic, intelligent fashion. And that doesn't happen automatically. And so these so-called ad hoc working groups are essentially trying to build those arrows that I've not really discussed at all, but which indicate the fact that this is a network of interaction, of shared and collaborative work. And so we have these so-called ad hoc working groups, including this Drive the Bus group that is actually mentioned, pictured in that little graphic there at the lower right-hand corner of the screen, but also a handful of others. So a group that is working away on making sure that the growth of CLC agriculture doesn't just perpetuate the inequity and lack of inclusion that characterizes current agriculture in many ways. A communications group, somewhat underpowered at the moment, but trying to gear up. Very importantly, a political working group that Don talked about that is responsible for the political successes, the really, I think, noteworthy political successes that have been achieved. So let me finish up with a few observations about accomplishments and challenges. So first of all, if one reads the sort of scholarly literature on ambitious, if not wildly ambitious, cross-sector partnerships that aspire to drive major sustainability transitions, amazingly, it's hard and slow work. Who knew? But in fact, to build these and actually start accomplishing something is the work of years, not months. And so here we are about 2 years into the formal sort of lifespan or history of the Forever Green Partnership. And we can say that a structure that looks something like what you see in that little diagram has formed, and the nodes are functioning, significantly in every case. The shared governance of this sort of, novel, complicated, vexing, mysterious thing, the shared governance of it is advancing. It took us a couple of years to sort of like realize that we needed to form a strategy group to actually be collectively conscious of how this thing is working out as a whole. But that did dawn on us, and we've now organized this. And as soon as everybody who is going to participate tells us when they're available we will actually bring this group together. And the partnership is definitely attracting resources. And this has importantly come from this broad political support that has been mentioned multiple times. Challenges, as I just said, forming something like this is, in the cases where something like this have been formed and actually has done some good in the world, it has taken a number of years to get up and running. So I guess we shouldn't be that surprised that we are not yet running on all cylinders. Developing shared understanding of this thing as a whole and of how the parts function and make a whole. That is hard, slow, expensive work as well. We realized that a sort of systemic problem has been the lack of resources to organize those cross-sector, cross-scale activities that really are the lifeblood of this thing understood as a collaborative structure. Those collaborations are not all that self-organizing, even if there's a lot of will and interest in doing so. So we do now have at least some resources. We are hiring some contracted help with that. That will be important. One reason it's important is that the academic literature, which is not huge, but it's growing, on how cross-sector, cross-scale networks, which are also known as polycentric networks. One of the things that literature shows is that if people can hang in there as affiliates and participants in these kinds of networks and have experiences in participating in cross-sector, cross-scale activities, they become more enthusiastic about the whole idea of a cross-sector, cross-scale network. They become more willing to invest their time and resources despite the horrific transaction costs, especially at the beginning. And so these learning by doing experiences are really important. And for people to have those experiences, you have to have some resources to organize them. So I will leave it at that and would welcome comments, questions, etc.
Just to clarify, Nick, the strategy group is a new bubble that is not yet on the screen, right?
That is true.
Okay. Oh, sorry. That was my fault. Anyone want to chime in with anything about those presentations or anything else Forever Green related? Final comments? Anything to say, Don?
Well, just one thing, Nick has indicated, the commitment to think through the partnership. And I think, we're kind of understating that commitment. Those folks that we were talking about that had from the NGO world that have worked with us for 25 years. They meet with Nick, myself, and others every other week for 2 damn hours, right? That's the level of commitment that these folks that he's describing in that NGO world have committed to us, right? So it is a huge, huge commitment of time. And those folks in a couple of the other bubbles, they meet once a month, right? With no compensation at all. So there's a whole core of people out there that have contributed in this partnership a tremendous amount of time and energy and resources to help build the support for the work that you guys are doing in the Forever Green initiative, right? So we sometimes understate that, but the commitment over the last couple of years has been intense from 3 to 4 NGOs that have worked tirelessly. And it's not fun to meet with Don every other week, right? That's a level of commitment, they have made, right? So I just want to make sure we put that on the record. It's what Nick presented is true, but much more in terms of the intensity of the engagement and commitment of time and effort that's coming out of this core support group that has been in place for many, many years, helping build what's now that broader partnership. So I just wanted to make sure we thank them specifically for all of the contributions they have made and continue to make to the program, because it's really substantial. So with that, I think we'll close it out today. And most of you know that the meetings are set up from 12 to 1:30. In most cases, we don't go to 1:30, but basically we want to let everyone know there are times when we get into discussions that we do move a few minutes beyond 1 hour. But we try to keep it under an hour and a half. But basically, as you join us, don't be surprised if conversations leads to an hour and a half. So, and also feel free to leave whenever you need to leave. So make sure that when we set this up, that an hour and a half is within the scheduling framework for the conversation. So with that, thank you all, and we'll see you all a week from today at 12 o'clock. And I would encourage you to attend in person if you can. Just looking at people in the eyes, oh my God, it's just exciting to have eyeballs looking at in person. So, but if you can't, feel free. We'll continue to record these, and we'll get the owl set up, I hope, by next week. So you can hear better when people ask questions here in person. So thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.